Delegates, please take your seats. We are starting now. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of my co-chair, Annie, and myself, I'd like to welcome you all to the 48th meeting of the open-ended working group of the parties to the Montreal Protocol. It's good to see all of you here in Bangkok. And for me personally, it is an honor to serve as your co-chair at this meeting. I look forward to working with all of you in the collaborative spirit of the Montreal Protocol, as it is known for. And I thank you in advance for your cooperation and your patience through the week. I would like to take this opportunity to express our appreciation to the government and the people of Thailand for their usual warm welcome and hospitality. We are joined this morning by Ms. Dichen Chering, the Director of UNEP's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. Madam Director, thank you for joining us at the OEWG48. I would now like to invite you to address us with a welcome statement. You have the floor.
Distinguished co-chairs, Ms. Annie Gabrielle, Ms. Igobe Mebulawa, Ms. Meg Seki, Executive Secretary of the Ozone Secretariat, Ms. Tina Bumperly, Chief Officer of the Multilateral Fund, delegates from parties to the protocol, members of the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel and its Technical Options Committee, colleagues from international organizations, civil society, academia, industry, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm good morning. It's my great pleasure on behalf of UNEP to warmly welcome you all to Bangkok at the 48th meeting of the open-ended working group of the parties to the Montreal Protocol. Allow me first to extend our appreciation to the government and people of Thailand for their generous hospitality and their continued support for the work of the Montreal Protocol. Montreal Protocol is recognized as one of the most successful multilateral environmental agreements in history. Through science-based policy making, international solidarity, sustained financial and technical support, parties have achieved extraordinary results in protecting the ozone layer and demonstrating that multilateral cooperation can provide measurable and lasting outcomes for people and the planet. This week, you will have an important agenda that will help shape the future direction of the protocol. Several issues will deserve your particular attention, including the report of the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel on the replenishment of the Multilateral Fund for the period 2027 to 2029. You will look at enhancing regional atmospheric monitoring of substances controlled by the Montreal Protocol and options for ensuring long-term viability of the Montreal Protocol operations. The UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has launched the UN80 process, and a lot of the process is focused on strengthening effectiveness, efficiency, and impact of the UN system. This initiative encourages us to examine how we work to identify opportunities to streamline processes, eliminate duplication, and make better use of resources, and ensure that our institutions remain responsive to present and future challenges. I hope this will have a positive impact on how we ensure that limited resources are used wisely, that expert contributions are maximized, and that decision-making processes continue to serve parties effectively and efficiently. We've always known the Montreal Protocol as a model of innovation and adaptability. Over the decades, parties have demonstrated a remarkable ability to respond to emerging scientific evidence, evolving technologies, and changing economic circumstances. It remains a key delivery mechanism because it provides a proven framework for international cooperation, technology transfer, capacity building, and financing through the Multilateral Fund. As delegates gathered this week, the international community continues to face multiple environmental and development challenges. Despite the advanced progress of HCFC phase-out in Asia-Pacific, Article 5 parties in the region continue to have challenges to manage two parallel obligations. For HCFC phase-out and HFC phase-out, which are attributed to increasing responsibilities of national ozone officers, complexity of HFC trade control monitoring, reporting, enforcement, limited financing and commercially viable alternatives, regulating and institutionalizing informal servicing sector, especially new sectors under the Kigali Amendment, and effective outreach to key stakeholders. Yet the Montreal Protocol continues to offer an inspiring example of what can be achieved when countries work together with trust, determination, and a shared sense of purpose. I'm confident that the spirit of cooperation will continue to guide your deliberations this week. I wish you productive discussions, successful outcomes, and a successful 48th meeting of the open-ended working group of the parties to the Montreal Protocol. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chering, and thank you for reminding us that the Montreal Protocol has remained a model of innovation and adaptability. Thank you so much. I would now like to invite the Executive Secretary of the Zone Secretariat, Ms. Meg Saki, to make her statement. Meg, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Ms. Dechen, UNEP's Asia and the Pacific Office Director, who is my colleague and friend, thank you for being with us every time we have our meeting in Bangkok, and for your informative statement and your warm welcome, which always puts us in an auspicious start to our meetings. Esteemed co-chairs, distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends, we are here again in the vibrant city of Bangkok and at the UNCC, which has one of the best conference service teams of the United Nations. We are very lucky to be here when we are facing sensitive, complex issues and have a lot of work ahead of us. The first thing I would like to mention is about our co-chair. As I informed the parties in my email of last week, Ms. Leila Akello Gonassa from Uganda, who was selected to be co-chair of this year's OEWG, was unable to attend this meeting due to travel restrictions. Uganda, after consultations with the African group and with some other additional Article 5 parties, has nominated Ms. Igobe Mbulana from Botswana to replace Leila. I thank Igobe for stepping in at very short notice, and I thank the parties for their support for this change. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, you are facing a busy week ahead. We start with the OEWG today, then suspend its deliberations tomorrow to give way to the 6th extraordinary meeting of the parties to discuss and decide on the membership of the Implementation Committee of the Montreal Protocol. 5 new members of the committee need to be elected to make up the full membership of the committee. The 5 existing members have already been working to prepare for the 76th meeting of the IMCOM to be held immediately after this OEWG, to be joined by the 5 new members once parties elect them. We have received 2 nominations for the EEG seat on the IMCOM. This situation may require voting, something unprecedented for the Montreal Protocol, and not something that I had envisaged witnessing in my lifetime in the Montreal Protocol. While this would be a procedural vote rather than a substantive one, it would nonetheless be the first time in the 40-year history of the Montreal Protocol that consensus amongst the parties could not be found. And I think we are the only MEA that has not gone through voting yet. I do hope that the parties use the time since the MOP 37 in Nairobi last year to continue consultations to see if any compromise would be possible. In any case, the Bangkok team here is very experienced, and we are in good hands to conduct the voting as needed. Distinguished delegates, there are several important issues to be addressed by the OEWG, and I would like to just mention a few of them. On the replenishment, TEEP has prepared its report on the 2027 to 29 replenishment. The estimates for the replenishment range from 1.2 billion to 1.7 billion US dollars, with a significant carryover expected. At this meeting, parties will determine what more information and analysis they would require or request from the task force of the TEEP to enable informed negotiations and replenishment discussion at the MOP later this year. For your information, the task force, with support from the Secretariat, has developed a calculation tool based on their modeling to facilitate the estimation of the replenishment based on the various scenarios and assumptions. While this tool is still being refined, it represents a major step forward in making the replenishment process more accessible, functional, flexible, and transparent to the parties. On atmospheric monitoring, the Advisory Committee of the Vienna Convention General Trust Fund and the Ozone Secretariat have made steady progress in identifying suitable sites and existing infrastructures for the establishment of monitoring stations in priority locations, and have started informal consultations with the relevant parties in those regions. At the same time, the Executive Committee and the Fund Secretariat have advanced preparations for the implementation of pilot monitoring projects under the Multilateral Fund. Together, these efforts reflect the parties' collective commitment to strengthening global atmospheric monitoring capacity and are laying the foundation for a lasting legacy. To further support the parties' efforts, the Secretariat is developing a practical cost estimation tool for the establishment and operation of the monitoring stations. Working closely with Advisory Committee, the underlying cost structures and estimates that form the basis of the tool were developed, enabling users to calculate the costs associated with establishing and operating atmospheric monitoring stations under a range of operational scenarios. The tool has been designed to allow users to adjust individual cost components to reflect national circumstances, local market conditions, existing infrastructure, and operational requirements to generate more accurate and country-specific estimates. The tool will be made available to the parties to test and provide feedback that will help refine and enhance its functionality before it is finalized. On the viability of Montreal Protocol operations, as requested by the parties, the Secretariat has prepared a document on the options for making effective and efficient changes with associated cost estimates to the operation of the Montreal Protocol, focusing on the meetings of the Montreal Protocol bodies, including the assessment panels, and the timing of replenishment decisions. As you review the document, you will see that if business as usual continues with the expenditure rate of 85%, and if we receive 75% of contributions, the Montreal Protocol Trust Fund cash balance will drop below the required level of the cash reserves by 2031. And the Secretariat will be unable to operate in support of the parties and the Montreal Protocol. In discussing this topic, I hope that the parties find ways to safeguard the operation and the effectiveness of our ozone treaties. Other issues on the agenda include progress reports of the TEEP and its technical options committees, including their responses to specific decisions by the parties. And we also hear from Rwanda about the status of preparations, their plans and visions for MOP 38. The plans for MOP 38 include celebrating the ratification of the Kigali Amendment by as many parties as possible to mark the 10th anniversary. We are halfway through the year, and 173 parties have now ratified the amendment. This is a remarkable milestone, but we are still a significant number short before we can truly reap the benefits of the Kigali Amendment. I encourage the remaining 25 parties to ratify so that we can celebrate the anniversary with full global unity. Dear delegates, some discussions will be lengthy and complex, but as always, this body needs to remain strong and steadfast in the spirit of the collaboration and consensus that has always guided the negotiations over the decades, ensuring that the Montreal Protocol continues to deliver. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you productive and fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the Executive Secretary for her statement, which reminded us that even with a lot of work we have ahead of us, we have to remain strong and steadfast. Thank you very much, Meg. Before we turn to the next agenda item, I would like to give Ms. Chering the opportunity to leave the plenary to attend to other pressing matters. Thank you once again for being with us. I now hand over to my co-chair to deal with the next agenda item.
Thank you, Igobi, and good morning to everyone. We will now start with agenda item 2A on the adoption of the agenda. The provisional agenda is contained in document 48/1 and the annotated agenda in 48(1) add 1 rev 1. You can access all of these reference documents for each agenda item on the website and through the annotated agenda. I would now like to see if delegates would like to make changes to the provisional agenda. Under item 4E on any other issues, under the presentations by TEEP on its 2026 progress report, parties may wish to add any issues of importance from the TEEP. progress report they think they should be considered at this meeting that are not covered in the provisional agenda. Under agenda item 9, other matters, parties may wish to raise any other matters that they think should be discussed at this meeting. I now open the floor for any comments and suggestions. I have 2 parties wishing to take the floor, 3 at this point, 4. This is a little déjà vu moment. So on my list I have United States, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and Canada. So I turn the floor now to the United States. US, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Thanks to the Secretariat for all their preparation for this meeting. I actually had hit my button several minutes ago, so I actually don't have a comment on the agenda. What I want to do is to confirm procedurally how we have appointed a new co-chair. So we heard the executive secretary mention this. We're perfectly happy with this appointment, but under Rule 26, paragraph 3 and 4, it describes how we appoint officers for our committee. So I just want to make sure our understanding is that we are operating under, so this isn't something that the Secretariat does the appointment on their own, it's actually the committee. So under 26.4, we just want to make sure, and I'll want the meeting report to reflect that that is how we're undertaking this replacement. Paragraph 4 speaks to each committee or working group shall elect its own officers. And I just want to make sure that indeed it is the committee that is affirming this appointment. We strongly support the appointment, but procedurally, I think it's actually something that this entire committee should actually affirmatively move forward with. We see no problem with it, but I do think it actually is the business of this committee, and I'm not sure we've moved forward on a basis that's entirely clear to me. So perhaps we could just sort of pause and ensure that we're on the same path, that we're operating under 26.4, and then we can move on with the rest of our business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think actually a pause now would be a good time to address this issue. Can I perhaps turn to the Secretariat to provide some guidance? Whoever from the Secretariat is the most appropriate.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and good morning to the delegates. As regards the question of the United States, as indicated in the message of the Executive Secretary that was sent to all parties last week, the Secretariat, after receiving a note from the Environmental Management Authority of Uganda regarding the inability of the co-chair to come to this meeting due to travel restrictions. So after receiving that message, we applied Rules 24 and 26 of the Rules of Procedure, and in particular the provision in the Rules of Procedure in Rule 24 that talks about the replacement of a member of the Bureau. So applying that rule mutatis mutandis, after receiving the notification from Uganda, we had understood that Uganda, now exercising the right under this rule, designated the delegate from Botswana to take the place of the co-chair for the OEWG. As the Executive Secretary also emphasized this morning, this was done in consultation with the African group, whose turn it was to take the chair of the OEWG for the Article 5 parties, and in consultation with other Article 5 parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. I see the US wishes to respond?
Yeah, thank you. I think we're well aware, and we heard the executive secretary speak to this, and we've seen the note. Our issue, just to be clear, we're very happy to move forward with our new co-chair. But I guess what we're saying is it's not up, like the secretariat and the person who was named don't have the right of appointment. Rule 24 specifically, so I'm a little concerned because you're now quoting Rule 24, which speaks to officers of the Bureau. So we think we're operating under Rule 26. Rule 26, paragraph 4 says each committee or working group shall elect its own officers. So I guess we can continue debating the rules. I guess what I'm suggesting is we simply move forward very quickly and make it clear we're moving forward under 26.4. Our concern is that electing the officers of these committees needs to be done in accordance with the rules of procedure, which calls upon us to have a role to elect our officers and in replacement. So I think our preference would just be perhaps our Australian co-chair could simply clarify, unless someone disagrees, that we're moving forward under 26.4 with this co-chair, and I think that would solve the issue. But for the future, this is important for the future, just in terms of how these replacements are done, that they need to be done in accordance with the rules of procedure. Thanks.
Thank you very much, United States, for clarifying your views on this issue. So, as I understand it, we are agreeing or appointing Igobi from Botswana under Rule 26, paragraph 4 of the Rules of Procedure, in the absence of the previously appointed co-chair, which was decided at MOP 7 last year. It all flies so fast. If there is no objection to that way forward, I don't see anybody wishing to take the floor, so thank you very much. We will now proceed with agenda item 2A on the adoption of the agenda, and I give the floor now to Kazakhstan.
Good morning, dear co-chairs, distinguished delegates, representative of Azon Secretariat, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I wish to express our sincere appreciation to the people and the government of Kingdom of Thailand for hosting this meeting, and the Azon Secretariat for the excellent organization of the 48th meeting of the open-ended working group of the parties to the Montreal Protocol, and the 66th extraordinary meeting of the parties ex-MOP 6. For nearly 3 decades, Kazakhstan and other Central Asian states have been active and constructive members of Montreal Protocol, fully committed to fulfilling its obligations under international agreements related to the protection of the ozone layer and the global climate. And we continue to make our tireless efforts to achieve shared goals and uphold the values of partnership, inclusivity, and mutual respect that have guided the Montreal Protocol for nearly 4 decades. However, at the 37th meeting of the parties, we have heard proposals to review the composition of Eastern European Group. And we believe that equal participation of all states in international cooperation and decision-making process in accordance with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. In this regard, Central Asian countries prepared a conference room paper, CRP, which was submitted to the Secretariat, and we humbly call all distinguished member states to endorse our efforts to strengthen our platform and focus on things that unite all of us rather than our differences. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Kazakhstan. So I take it you wish to consider a CRP at this meeting. On my list, I have Canada, Cameroon, Lesotho, and Azerbaijan. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and I would like as well to express our appreciation to the Kingdom of Thailand for welcoming us in their country, where once again we're reunited for an OEWG meeting. I take the floor to suggest the addition of an item under agenda item 4E, other issues emanating from the TEEP report. Specifically, we would like to add consideration of destruction technology, which is considered under Chapter 5 of the TEEP 2026 progress report. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Canada. Cameroon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, for the opportunity. I wish to use this opportunity to thank the government and people of Thailand for the continuous support to the Montreal Protocol and their warm hospitality. We equally want to extend our appreciation to the Zone Secretariat for the wonderful organization that we're enjoying this meeting right now. I want to intervene at agenda item 8, that the African group of negotiators wish to propose a CRP on this matter, and I don't wish that the Secretariat or the Assembly should consider that this subject matter on talking about furthering is strengthening protocol operations. Thank you very much, Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Cameroon. Can I clarify whether you wish your proposal is in respect of agenda item 7, which is further strengthening the Montreal Protocol, or agenda item 8, which is the status of preparations for MOP 38?
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. It's article agenda 7. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you're not adding an item to the agenda, you're just foreshadowing a CRP or a decision. Thank you very much for that clarification, Cameroon. Lesotho, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam. Let me first of all thank the government of Thailand for their welcome to host OEWG, also the Ozone Secretariat for the good preparation, and good morning to you all parties. We raised the issue under agenda item 9, other matters. We would like to raise the issue of nitrous oxide substance from which the growing threat of the ozone layer can no longer be ignored. Nitrous oxide is now world's most significant ozone-depleting substance, with annual emissions roughly equal to all ODS controlled at the Montreal Protocol combined. Yet, despite being listed in Annex 1 of Vienna Convention as substances known as to deplete the ozone substances, it remains the last significant ODS not controlled by the parties. By this, we are considering Scientific Assessment Panel SAP 2022 Assessment Report. Also, we are considering 2024 Global Nitrous Oxide Assessments by UNEP and FOO which both considered this substance as one of the ozone depleting substances, but not yet controlled by the parties. We are also, on this topic of nitrous oxide, we are considering the submission of CRP at this meeting, requesting further information from SAP, as well as information from TIP. Our goal is for this request is to provide parties with clear understanding of the threat nitrous oxide possesses to the ozone recovery, as well as the option available to control, mitigate, and abatement of these substances. Also, our aim is simple as we approach the 40th anniversary of Montreal Protocol next year. We only wish to ensure that parties are informed of this potential threat so that we can be well considered in how any response would be taken to safeguard our treaty's legacy of the ozone protections. By so saying, we just request to put on CRP, requesting just a study from SAP and TIP. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lesotho. I think that was clear, and you provided some additional information for the parties in relation to your proposed agenda item. Finally, on my list, I have Azerbaijan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. This is my first intervention. I would like to extend greetings on behalf of Azerbaijan and wish all parties a productive meeting. Azerbaijan would like to request the inclusion to the item 9 under other matters, the consideration of the implementation of paragraph 2 and 4 of Article 2J of the Montreal Protocol in respect of Azerbaijan. This matter arises from the entry into force of the Kigali Amendment for Azerbaijan on 22nd of February 2026. A brief information note has been circulated to provide parties with an overview of the request. Azerbaijan would welcome consideration of this matter, seeking the views from the countries on how the provisions of paragraph 2 and 4 of Article 2J of the Montreal Protocol are to be applied in respect of Azerbaijan. Conference room paper was prepared, which will be provided to facilitate further discussion and consideration by parties. Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Thank you very much, Azerbaijan, and we note that information was provided earlier in the note from the Secretariat on your issue. I now have a new delegate wishing to take the floor from Turkmenistan. You have the floor.
Спасибо большое, господин председатель. Позвольте мне от имени делегации Туркменистана выразить благодарность Озоновому секретариату ЮНЕП, многостороннему фонду и всем партнерам за постоянную поддержку в реализации Венской конвенции об охране озонового слоя Монреальского протокола и Кигалийских и других поправок. Спасибо большое за организацию этой встречи. Я буквально на 1 минуту. Туркменистан поддерживает предложение Казахстана о включении CRP по вопросу Центральноазиатской группы в адженду. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Turkmenistan, for that support. I see Uzbekistan wishes to take the floor. Is this on the same issue? I don't think it is perhaps necessary, but if you wish to take the floor on this issue, you're welcome. Uzbekistan.
Салам алейкум. Добрый день. Спасибо за предоставленное слово. Да, это по тому же вопросу. В первую очередь, позвольте выразить благодарность как и секретариату, так и принимающей стороне за очень достойную организацию данного мероприятия. И мы полностью согласны и поддерживаем позицию Казахстана и следующую за ним позицию Туркменистана по указанной тематике. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Uzbekistan. So we have proposals for 4 new agenda items. I will just briefly summarize. Under item 4E, the the proposal from Canada for consideration of a destruction technology. And under agenda item 9, 3 new issues. The issue of the Eastern European group put forward by Kazakhstan, the issue of nitrous oxide put forward by Lesotho, and the issue of the application of paragraphs 2 and 4 of Article 2J to Azerbaijan as put forward by Azerbaijan. Can the meeting agree to adopt the agenda with these changes? I see the EU. You have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and good morning, colleagues. And as this is the first time that the delegation of Ireland and the European Union has taken the floor, I'd just like to thank the government of Thailand for the hospitality they've shown. It's always fantastic to come back to the wonderful city of Bangkok. I'd also like to thank the Ozone Secretariat for their, as always, excellent preparations in getting this meeting up and running. For information, Ireland holds the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union for the period July to December 2026. As such, our delegation, along with our colleagues from the European Commission, will represent the European Union and its 27 member states during the negotiations for the Montreal Protocol. Regarding the item under discussion, the European Union and member states feel that this is not the right forum to discuss the membership of regional groups. We don't think it is a matter for the MOP to decide on the composition of the regional groups, as these groups operate on an informal basis. Nonetheless, we will take part in the discussion when it comes up under the agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, EU, and your points will be reflected in the report of the meeting. Appreciate that. Since I see no other delegation wishing to take the floor, the agenda is adopted. I have to gavel, apparently. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I now hand over to my co-chair to deal with the next agenda sub-item 2B. Thank you, Igobi.
Thank you, Annie. I would now like us to turn to agenda item 2B on the organization of work and present the order and the timing of how we might move through the agenda today and for the rest of the week. You will see from the next few slides the proposed organization of work. The co-chairs have estimated how long the discussion of each agenda item may take and fitted the agenda items into the sessions accordingly, but will adjust the timing as necessary as we proceed through the discussions. The slide that is currently being projected shows the proposed organization of work for the rest of today. As you know, the 6th extraordinary meeting of the parties will take place tomorrow. If XMOP finishes early, we may want to convene the open-ended working group after XMOP 6 closes. We will have to see how things go. Any such meeting will be decided on and announced in the XMOP plenary and on the screens. Assuming that XMOP takes the whole day, the next 2 slides show the proposed organization of work for Wednesday. The first one for the morning and the second one for the afternoon. As we get through all the substantive agenda items, we will establish contact groups and informal groups as necessary. If all goes smoothly as planned, then Thursday afternoon and the rest of the days of the meetings can be allocated to meetings of those groups. Consistent with our practice, we will try to ensure that none of the contact groups and informal groups meet simultaneously. On Friday morning, the plenary will reconvene to receive reports back from the groups. And on Friday afternoon, when all the work on all substantive agenda items have been completed, we will adopt the report of the meeting under agenda item 10, and then move on to the closure of the meeting, which is agenda item 11. Now, a few housekeeping matters need to be mentioned. For XMOB 6, parties are reminded to submit their original credentials for XMOB 6 to the Secretariat today to enable the Bureau to examine the credentials tomorrow morning before the opening of XMOB 6. As usual, our morning sessions will run from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and afternoon sessions from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. We will be starting all sessions on time so that we do not waste the available interpretation time. The Secretariat will ring the bell a few minutes before the start of each plenary session. The timings for the plenary sessions, contact groups, and informal group meetings will be projected on the screens in this room after every plenary session and announced on the screens around the venue and in the meeting portal that can be accessed on your cell phone as well as the mobile app. The users of the mobile app will receive notifications on any changes to the schedule and urgent matters. I encourage you all to download and use this app if you have not done so. To book meeting rooms, please send an email to the conference management team. The email is indicated on the screens and on the meeting information page of the meeting portal. Regarding conference room papers, please submit them in electronic form as soon as possible to Ms. Georgina Lloyd. Georgina's email is indicated on the screen and on the meeting portal. Please bear in mind that, as usual, we have time constraints for translation. Any CRPs submitted before lunch break on Thursday would be translated and made available in the 6 official UN languages. Documents received after this cut-off time will be made available to the meeting in English only or in any other UN language in which it was submitted. If you need any help or information, please seek assistance from the Secretariat help desk located outside of the meeting hall on this floor. The last point I need to make is that during lunch break, as well as in the evenings, there will be several interesting side events which we would like to encourage all of you to attend whenever possible. I'd now like to make sure the organization of work we've laid out is acceptable to the meeting. Are there any comments or questions? I don't see any requests for the floor. Thank you very much for your patience and your cooperation. The organization of work is agreed. Nice. I now hand over to my co-chair to deal with the next item.
Thank you very much, Igobi. We'll now consider agenda item 3 on the report of the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel on the 2027-2029 replenishment of the Multilateral Fund. In this meeting, we are discussing the replenishment report by the TEEP with a view to ensuring that the parties have the information they need to reach an agreement on the funding levels for the MLF at MOP 38 later this year. The replenishment report has always been crucial for the replenishment negotiations and the decisions on funding required by Article 5 parties to implement the Montreal Protocol. On behalf of all parties, I would like to thank the TEEP and its replenishment task force for their hard work and dedication in producing this report. I would like to now invite the TEEP task force to present its replenishment report. Please keep your presentation within the allocated time of around 40 minutes. So I would like to invite them to come to the podium. Thank you very much. Teep, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. On the behalf of the TEEP Replenishment Task Force and my co-chair, Sueli Carvalho, I would like to go ahead and begin our presentation of the assessment of the funding requirement for the replenishment of the multilateral fund for the period 2027 through 2029. And good morning, distinguished delegates as well. Our presentation this morning will provide a brief introduction. We will provide the estimated funding for the HCFC phase out, the estimated funding for the HFC phase down, and a summary of the total estimated funding for the 2027 through 2029 triennium and the next 2 triennia. We will also provide our responses to additional requests in our terms of reference for our study, as well as additional information for the consideration of parties. Decision 37-6 provided the terms of reference for the current study on the replenishment of the multilateral fund. I won't review and read through the entire study or decision, but I would like to highlight some of the specific requests which the task force took into account in our report. We were asked to take into account, among other things, the special needs of low volume consuming and very low volume consuming countries, in particular taking into account the relative decisions of the executive committee pertaining to those countries. We were also asked to consider the need to allocate resources to enable all Article 5 parties to comply with the reductions and extended commitments under their approved HCFC phase-out management plans and Kigali implementation plans. We were also asked to consider integrating digital technologies and tools within the servicing sector, and to provide a scenario to allocate resources for funding to support a limited number of pilot projects to enhance regional atmospheric monitoring. In addition, we were asked in the decision to clearly explain our compliance-based methodology, informed but independent of the business plan of the multilateral fund, and applying a range of cost-effectiveness figures for the manufacturing sectors based on both historical experience as well as cost-effectiveness cost guideline threshold approved by the executive committee. The panel was asked to strive to complete our report in good time for your discussions at this meeting, to also provide indicative figures for the next 2 triennia, and to share the details of our calculations in the form of an appendix to our report, so that our approach, methodology, and analysis are able to be understood fully by parties. These are the members of the TEEP Replenishment Task Force. We're very grateful for the contributions of these experts, members, and a consulting expert to the task force and their work this year. We're also very grateful to the support of the Ozone Secretariat, as well as the Multilateral Fund Secretariat, to the work of the task force. The 2027 through 2029 triennium and the next 2 triennia represent significant milestones under the Montreal Protocol for the phase-out of ozone-depleting substances and the phase-down of HFCs. It's worth noting that the Multilateral Fund will provide funding to Article 5 parties to complete the phase-out of HCFCs by January 1, 2030, a significant achievement under the Montreal Protocol. In this period, the Multilateral Fund will also fund the first reduction steps for HFCs under the Kigali Amendment for both Group 1 and Group 2 parties. For Group 1 parties, the compliance targets are a 10% reduction from baseline by 2029 and a 30% reduction by 2035. For Group 2 parties, the compliance targets are a freeze in 2028 and a 10% reduction by 2032. The RTF estimated funding requirements for the 2027 to 2029 triennia and the next 2 triennia take strictly into account the relevant compliance targets within these periods as requested by the decision. This slide just meant to convey our timeline for the preparation of our reports this year. The task force met in person in February to begin planning its work, hosted by the Multilateral Fund Secretariat in Montreal. Really appreciative of that hospitality as well as the continuing support from the Secretariat. We submitted our report in May. We attended the Executive Committee meeting in June. We look forward to the discussions at this meeting and planning for a supplementary report. The task force will be meeting immediately after OEWG to begin that work. We'll submit our report in September in advance of the parties' discussions at their November meeting. Our current report, our May 2026 RTF report, was based on information and available data as of April of this year, and EXCOM decisions up to the 97th meeting. For the supplementary report, we'll look to the decisions and discussions that came out of the 98th meeting of the Executive Committee, the discussions from this meeting, as well as further guidance from parties, any updates to Article 7 data, reporting and country program data, updates to the status of Kigali Amendment ratifications, any other adjustments to the Multilateral Fund database that would impact our funding scenarios, and any other relevant information and new data that might be available to the task force during the preparation of its supplementary report, which is quite short, it's July and August, in order for us to review, go through our consensus review process, and submit a report by September. I will now present our estimated funding approach for the HCFC phase-out. The HCFC phase-out funding requirement for this triennium was calculated considering that the large majority of HCFC phase-out management plans, or HPMPs, are addressing the complete phase-out by 2030. Parties that wish to phase out HCFCs completely by January 1, 2030 must ensure through regulatory and policy measures that HCFCs would not be imported after that date, except for those 2.5% allowed for a servicing tail between 2030 and 2040, where required and consistent with the provisions of the Montreal Protocol. If a country is intending to have consumption during the 2030 to 2040 period, modifications would need to be made to its agreement with the Executive Committee covering the period beyond 2030. Changes to the agreement might affect the targets, but not the funding levels. So accordingly, the Replenishment Task Force assumed that all remaining eligible consumption for funding is to be addressed by 2030. The total funding to address the HCFC phase-out compliance targets include the costs for HCFC production sector, HCFC consumption sector, including energy efficiency projects for LVCs, and project preparation and verification. This table shows remaining HCFC consumption by substance. It's just a reminder that our task is not yet done. There remains consumption still to be addressed to complete the HCFC phase-out. For the production sector, the total funding requirement for the 2027 through 2029 triennium is estimated at $23.5 million US. The details of this are in section 2.9 of the report. Only one party was considered for funding in the 2027 to 2029 triennium. The slide shows the steps that we followed to come up with our estimated funding for the consumption sector using our compliance model. It gives a snapshot as of decisions from the 97th Executive Committee meeting and approvals there of what RTF needed to consider for this estimated funding. And the details of our compliance model for the HCFC consumption sector can be found in Annex 1 of our report. For 116 Article 5 parties with approved HPMPs that reach 100% phase out by 2030, we estimated funding that's already been committed under Step A. Under Step B, we estimated new funding for 3 parties with canceled HPMPs. The RTF assumed that those projects would be resubmitted to allow for implementation in the next triennium. Step C, for the 25 Article 5 parties that had approved HPMPs but without reaching 100% phase out, there remains eligible consumption to be addressed. For the 10 LVC parties that haven't reached complete phase out agreements, we followed Executive Committee Decision 7450. For the 15 non-LVC parties with remaining eligible consumption to reach full phase out, we discussed provide 2 scenarios to provide a range. Scenario 1, based on historical cost effectiveness for the manufacturing sector, and a scenario 2, applying cost effectiveness HCFC cost guidelines for the manufacturing sector. Because this component introduces the most significant range and impact of the funding will be discussed in more detail in the following slides. We also included new funding estimates for under Step D and E, energy efficiency for low volume consuming countries based on Decision 89.6, and project preparation and verification. Under Scenario 1, the cost effectiveness thresholds used for the manufacturing sectors are detailed in Annex 2 of the report in a document named RTF Analysis of the XCOM document 8910 Rev 1. For those sectors that did not have cost effectiveness values, but only on a case-by-case basis, RTF estimated those. For China, the RTF collected average cost effectiveness per sector based on China's projects listed in that document. For the other 14 non-LVC parties, the RTF collected average cost effectiveness per sector for investment projects listed, excluding China's projects. $4.8 per kilogram were applied based on the cost guidelines for the servicing sector for all 15 parties. Including the support costs of 9.6% under the Scenario 1, the estimated funding for 100% consumption sector phase out by the 15 parties, applying a historical cost effectiveness threshold for the manufacturing sector, totals $370 million US. Under Scenario 2, applying cost effectiveness from the HCFC cost guidelines and filling in the gaps for those sectors with cost effectiveness values that are determined on a case-by-case basis, including support costs of 9.6%. Under Scenario 2, the estimated funding for 100% consumption sector phase out for the 15 parties using the cost guidelines cost effectiveness values totals $506 million US. In summary, applying those 2 scenarios to the 15 parties to achieve a complete phase out, we also included, made an assumption of a 15% deduction in funding to manufacturing sectors to account for foreign ownership. We didn't include project management unit costs, but can consider those for our supplementary report based on the guidance of parties. The total estimated funding for the production and consumption sectors, including energy efficiency, project preparation and verification, were distributed among the 2 triennia for the phase out, and RTF has suggested a resource allocation across these triennia of 90% funding for the first triennium in 27, 28, 29, and 10% funding for the last tranche in 2029, or after 2029. This provides the total funding estimate for all steps, covering the consumption sector estimates that we discussed. As you can see, the range is most significant for step C for the 15 countries that still need to complete their phase out, for which we provided the range under scenarios 1 and 2. In this table, we provided the resource allocation proposed of 90% in 2027 through 2029, leaving 10% of funding for the last HPMP tranche after 2029. The total estimated funding range for the HCFC production and consumption sectors are presented in this table. For 2027 through 2029, the total estimated funding range is 451 to 573 million US dollars. For 2030, 2030, the total estimated funding range is 83 to 96 million US dollars. With that, I'll turn it to Sueli to cover the estimated funding for the HFC phase down.
Thank you, Bella. Can you help me changing? Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'll be presenting then the estimated funding approach for the HFC phase down in the consumption and production sector. Just to better understand the steps, it always started with the RTF TOR requesting us to calculate funding for 3 triennia from 2027 to 2035 period, what is usually the case for all the replenishment reports. The control targets that fall in this period are for G1 parties, G1 group parties, 10% by 2029 and 30% by 2035. For the G2 parties, the freeze by 2028 and 10% by 2032. So the task force estimated funding for the G1 parties to cover KIP stage 1, that is the 10% reduction, and then KIP stage 2, that's the 30% reduction. And for G2 parties, the freeze and KIP stage 1, that is for the G2 is the 10% reduction under 2 scenarios. The first scenario, we calculated the funding based on application of cost effectiveness threshold without consider the proportion of SMEs, the small and medium enterprises in manufacturing sectors. In the scenario 2, we applied the cost effectiveness factors with the considering the SMEs in the proportion in the manufacturing sector. For each scenario, we got the total funding calculated for scenario 1 and 2, and then allocated that total among 3 triennia. And then as per a proposal that we did for a resource allocation based on 2 different sets of schedules. And the schedules are going to be, we record as Schedule A and Schedule B. So basically, in summary, we have a total for 9 years, that's the 3 replenishments to fit in the control targets up to 2035, and then we got that total and allocated in 3 different replenishment periods. Next, please. The same way for HCFCs, the compliance model steps as detailed in the Annex 4 of the report follow this snapshot. First, as of XCOM 97, we had 83 parties in Group 1 that had approved KIP Stage 1, and those parties had approved KIPs with percentage reduction agreed from the baseline that were different. They're not for all parties was just 10%. So we calculated in this group the committed funding for all these 83 approved KIP Stage 1, and then estimated new funding for KIP Stage 2 for 70 parties that have reductions below the 30% of the baseline. If you remember, we're doing 9 years, and the last replenishment is to achieve the 30% reduction by 2035. Out of this total of 83 parties, 13 had reductions agreed with the executive committee above 30%, so beyond 2035. And so those were not included, as they were already funded to reach beyond the 30% reduction required until 2035. 42 parties in both G1 and G2 groups did not have approved KIP Stage 1 as of XCOM 97, and they all had ratified Kigali. So we calculated new funding for those 36 Article 5 parties to prepare and submit KIP Stage 1 and 2 to reach 10% by 2029 and 30% by 2035. For the G2 group parties, new funding was estimated for 6 parties to achieve the freeze and 10% reduction by 2032. 19 parties had not ratified the Kigali amendment as of 8 April 2026. So RTF assumed that they will ratify all of them in the 2027 to 2029 period, so we have calculated funding for those parties too. So the new funding for G1 for 16A5 to achieve the 10 and 30% reduction, and for G2, 3 parties that we assume will ratify to achieve, to get funding to achieve the freeze and the 10% reduction by 2032. Next. Due to the time constraints in this presentation, I'm jumping into summary tables, but everything is detailed in the report, in the annex as well of the report. So the total for this 3 replenishment periods for KIP Stage 1 and KIP Stage 2 for Scenario 1 is and 2 is in this table. With the grand total is $2.19 billion and $2.26 billion for, again, for the 3 replenishment periods. Next, please. In order to calculate funding, RTF has to understand how the consumption is distributed among sectors. We usually count on country program data that A5 parties submitted to Multilateral Fund Secretariat, because A7 data, it does not, it's reported by chemical, not by sector. So we had some difficulties with the accuracy of the data reported in country programs. So we had to rely on the analysis by chemical that we did using our experts from the Technical Options Committee for the different sectors to understand which chemical was actually the proportion of that chemical that would fall in each sector. And in doing so, we separated the parties in clusters. And the first one, the highest consumption party based on the baseline, that is China. And then following that, we grouped the top 10 consumption parties. And then we separated G2 countries and LVCs, and the remaining parties is under other. And this is the sector distribution that we use to apply the dollar per kilo cost effectiveness figures for the manufacturing sectors for each group and get the final funding figure. Next, please. For this scenario one, as I mentioned before, we apply this to scenario 1 and 2, without considering the proportion of SMEs in some manufacturing sectors. These were the cost effectiveness figures that we applied. Those are based on the cost guidelines, and it's described in detail in the report for the case-by-case cases, for the case-by-case sectors where the EXCOM decides on how to apply the cost effectiveness figure. These were the ones that RTF used in the calculation. Next, please. For scenario 2, we counted on our expert advice from the TOCs and that are members of the task force to find the percentage of SMEs in different sectors. Of course, not all sectors are considered to have SMEs in the scope, but this is what we used based on TOC expert advice. And those are the SME cost effectiveness figures that were used for those sectors that have SMEs. And we use the figures based on EXCOM decision. I think it's 95, 60, 67, right? Thank you. And then for all the non-LVCs in G1, G2 parties that we use the ones that we didn't apply the SME CE, we use the current cost guideline CEs. Next, please. So going back to that first slide that I showed you, that I introduced the concept of calculating the total funding necessary for KIP stage 1 and stage 2, G1 and G2 countries in the two scenarios. We came up with two total numbers that are required to comply with the targets until 2035. So we got this total funding per scenario that, if you recall, it's in the order of around $2 billion, around that for each scenario. And then we proposed a way to split this total funding in 3 scenarios, in 3 replenishments. So basically, the schedules are in this table, and I'm going to try to go over so you can understand a little bit better. So for Schedule A, we first look into the group here on the left, the G1 parties with approved KIPS stage 1. And then we consider that if they are ready for stage 2 in the next triennium, the funding needed for stage 2 can be distributed 60% in 2027 to 2029 and 40% in 2030 and 2032. For Schedule B, the 60-40% proportion would be allocated, but as of 2003 and beyond. So it's a more delayed, not so front-loaded as Schedule 1A. It's important to clarify that we're not talking about 60% of parties, we're talking about 60% of the funding for those parties that will be in that triennium. Allocation proposals can be adjusted accordingly by counting on the expedited approval of a portion of KIPS Stage 1 to 2 in the next 2027-2029 triennium, as in Allocation A, or leaving Stage 2 KIPS to be funded in the next 2 triennium, as in Allocation Proposal B. For the G1 parties here again, without any KIPS, as of the 97th meeting, there is urgency to fund 100% of that KIPS Stage 1 in the next triennium to meet the 10% reduction by 2029. The Schedule B is similar to A in this case, but we consider the 10% of the last tranche to be paid in 2030 to 2032. Schedule B is similar to A, but considered, those parties may also need to expedite Stage 2 KIP to reach 30% reduction by 2035. Going down to the G2 parties that don't have KIPS approved, Schedule A is similar to the one for G1 parties with KIPS Stage 1 approved. Schedule B funding will be in 2030, and you may think that it may be too slow for G2, and because they have to meet 10% reduction by 1st January 2032. But this is something, like I said, that can be adjusted, and we welcome your guidance on how to do this, because the compliance model is flexible, and we can do this as per your wish and after your negotiations. It's also important to clarify that we have not considered funding for Stage 2 for G2 parties, because that would mean we are focused on the 20% reduction by 2037, and that falls outside the 3 triennium that RTF covers, that goes up to 2035. So again, we welcome party suggestions and guidance on the schedules for the supplementary report. Next, please. The assumptions used, that's important to mention for the compliance model, considered again the decisions as of the XCOM 97, XCOM 98 already happened. There are several more KIPs approved, lots of progress. So we're gonna have to update this report in the supplementary report, considering all those changes. Also, again, we're gonna get new A7 data, and the ratification status may change. So all this is going to be updated. And again, we are assuming that all these parties that have not ratified will do so. The calculations were all, again, based on reductions from the baseline established in the Kigali Amendment. So the 65% HCFC component was considered as consumption in servicing sector. And in the calculations, we applied cost guidelines for that servicing sector. RTF addressed gaps for missing A7 and baseline data. And also, we try to fill gaps in terms of the sector consumption distribution, as mentioned before. And we have detailed that analysis and methodology in chapter 3.42 and in Annex 3. There is one paragraph in our terms of reference, paragraph 4, that request RTF to prepare scenarios for a varying numbers of A5 parties to submit KIPs for phase-down HFCs in advance of Montreal Protocol targets on a voluntary basis. And this was very challenging for us because we need to forecast who will come first and the intention of each party and all the national circumstances. So what we did is that we suggested those resource allocation because then that can be adjusted, and if parties wish a certain proportion of the consumption to go on a faster rate, we can adjust that schedule. So any other proposal from parties, we are welcome and we can address in the supplementary report. Thank you. As part of the HFC consumption sector funding calculation, we had to consider energy efficiency. This slide summarizes what we considered in terms of funding for the triennium, next triennium. And then we based that on 4 complementary funding pathways covering servicing, manufacturing, and end-user applications. The value of the funding proposed is in this table that totals $76 million for the low end and $133 million for the high end with support costs. The task force estimated energy funding needs, and the details are in the report where we explain exactly for each of the decisions what is the assumption and what RTF used to define this funding need. Next, please. We also were requested to look into a funding window to support the regional atmospheric monitoring. So we will ask for a scenario to allocate resources for a funding modality to support a limited number of pilot projects to enhance regional atmospheric monitoring of substance controlled by the Montreal Protocol. Assuming the establishment of a funding window at XCOM, and again, we're going to update the report to consider that decision, the RTF estimated funding for 2007 to 2029 and 2030 to 2032 to support 3 stations over a 5-year period. And so we're gonna update the report with the decisions from the XCOM meeting. So in summary, for the consumption sector, we prepared this table because it gives a better understanding of the components of the funding that was calculated to reach this total of, for the 3 triennium for scenario 1, that's this $2.3 billion. So it includes funding, the funding committed in all the steps that I presented in that snapshot of the parties that had committed funding in agreements, the parties that needed new funding, G1, G2, and includes project preparation, verification, and energy efficiency, and atmospheric monitoring. So this is the total for scenario 1 for the consumption sector. In the next slide, we'll give the total for scenario 2 on the consumption sector. Next, please. So now we go into the production sector. This slide presents the estimated funding requirements for production sector and HFC 23 mitigation projects. For the production sector, as both China and India were significantly below the 10% reduction freeze target from baseline for both G1 and G2 parties, RTF considered only project preparation funding for the 2027 to 29 triennium with no investment funding. For 23 mitigation activities, RTF estimated funding requirements for 4 parties, Argentina, Mexico, China, and India, mostly in the 2027 to 2029 triennium. Next. Our TOR also requests us to calculate funding estimates for the institutional strengthening and the standard activities, which are the UNEP cap, the core unit cost of UNDP, UNIDO, and the World Bank, multilateral fund secretariat and executive committee operation costs, monitoring and evaluation, and treasurer functions. The funding estimates presented in this slide were informed by executive committee decisions and reports, the multilateral fund business plan, and in consultation with the multilateral fund secretariat. RTF is very thankful to the multilateral fund secretariat for their support. Very much appreciated. Next. This slide, we then compile all the funding components that form the total needed for the replenishment under the compliance model. So it includes the HCFC phase out, the HFC phase down, and institutional strengthening and the standard activities. The grand total range is 1.28 to 1.36 billion US dollars on the low end, and the high end is 1.67 to 1.76 billion US dollar. This is a summary of the next triennium for your consideration. Next, please. Regarding additional information in our TOR that are relevant to the replenishment but did not they were not accounted as part of the compliance model, pending guidance from parties. We are going to talk next for some of these requests in the TOR. For instance, the TOR required RTF to consider special needs of LVCs and VLVCs, also to integrate digital technologies and tools in servicing sector. For LVCs, the special needs are considered under Chapter 6, but again, without computing any additional funding beyond what is decided by EXCOM decisions. To make it clear, LVC's funding were computed in the compliance model. It's there, but follows the EXCOM decisions regarding the application of the cost framework agreed by the EXCOM. And this cost framework is expected to be reviewed in 2028. For integrating digital technologies, RTF offers some key recommendations and estimated costs which were not computed as part of the total required funding. On a life cycle refrigerant management plans, no funding required was included in the replenishment totals, was not requested in our terms of reference. Nevertheless, RTF offered some cost elements that may be useful in future EXCOM deliberations. If EXCOM approves guidelines, there will be funding implications in the next triennium. RTF welcomes guidance from parties on this matter in the for the supplementary report. I will now request our RTF colleague Bassam El Assad and Omar Abdelaziz to present the next two slides on some of the mentioned topics.
Thank you, Sueli, for taking the special needs of low-volume consuming countries and very low-volume consuming countries. And as a reminder, in the last two previous replenishment reports, the RTF identified challenges by those LVCs and VLVCs in the implementation of HPMPs and KIPs. And these challenges included, among others, the uptake of new technologies, the lack of demand-side management programs, and insufficient funding to transform markets. The RTF suggested some approaches to harmonize activities and focus efforts. For this report, the RTF did an analysis of existing KIPs up to the 97th EXCOM and considered two issues in providing funding from the limited amounts available for KIP Stage 1 for the various categories of LVCs and VLVCs that impact their ability to transition out of HFCs into low GWP alternatives and energy efficient systems. The first issue is related to system building activities, and those activities are incurred at fixed cost irrespective of the level of consumption or of the funding brackets. The second issue is related to technician training costs and its share of the total funding provided. The analysis found that the fixed system building costs vary between 30 and 60% of the total funding, depending on the bracket, while training-related activities take up an additional between 16 and 26%, leaving little funding for other activities to support the technology transition while maintaining existing HFC systems. The situation is more accentuated for the first three brackets of the LVC funding, with the lowest bracket including the VLVCs. Next slide, please. Now, RTF compared funding available to the LVCs in the period up to 2029, which covered the last stage of the HPMP and the first stage of the KIP, as you can see in the third column. And compare that to what would be needed for KIP Stage 2 to maintain the same funding that's available until 2030 for the next step. RTF provided an example of what this funding would look like if the first three categories of the countries or brackets were funded at the same level. As you can see on the last column, the first three have the same funding levels. The table in the slide shows the combined funding to be almost 3 times what was provided for KIP Stage 1 funding, if you compare with the second column. Chapter 6 of the report includes the analysis and the elements corresponding to the figures shown here. I now pass it on to my colleague Omar Abdelaziz.
Thanks, Bassam. Chapter 9 of the RTF distinguishes between digitization, which replaces paper-based processes with software, and digitalization, which changes how servicing work is delivered and managed. The report organizes these tools into 3 tiers: transaction efficiency improvement, performance tools, and workflow and knowledge tools. The slides in front of you provides indicative costs. Transactive efficiency systems may require up to $50,000 upfront cost, with ongoing costs of roughly $50 to $200 per technician per month. Performance tools may require around $10,000 upfront, plus up to $200 per technician per month. Large workflow and knowledge platforms may cost up to $1.25 million per upfront cost, with ongoing costs of approximately $25,000 per month. These figures are illustrative and vary substantially by scale, localization, connectivity, and support requirements. Importantly, the task force did not include these costs in its servicing sector funding estimates or in the overall replenishment requirement. The key recommendation here is to integrate digital tools into existing servicing programs rather than create standalone systems. The priority should be given to low-cost, high-impact tools. Existing platforms should be used where possible, and long-term ownership and sustainability should be built in. The results should be measured through outcomes. Next slide. Next. As my colleague Swali mentioned earlier, although the LRM was not explicitly included in the RTF terms of reference, the decision 9789 shows that the Executive Committee is actively considering support mechanisms. It requests that the Multilateral Fund Secretariat prepare for XCOM 100 in 2027 possible funding modalities and draft cost guidelines elements for a potential LRM funding window. Chapter 8 and Annex 10 of the RTF report provide technical information and indicative costs to support these deliberations. HPMPs and KIPs fund some of the relevant LRM activities. However, they were designed to meet parties' obligations and generally do not provide the full infrastructure needed for LRM. The report identifies 4 areas where additional support may be needed. First, recovery, recycling, and collection system may require about $1,500 to $1,600 per technician for recovery machines, cylinder, digital gauges, and tools. A recovered refrigerant trading platform is estimated at about $10,000 per party plus roughly $250 per technician annually. Second, reclamation capacity may cost about $140,000 per center. For LVCs and VLVCs countries, regional approaches may be more practical because of limited economies of scale. Third, facilitating transboundary movement for reclamation or destruction consistent with the Basel Convention is estimated at about $51,000, $300 per party. Finally, adapting cement kilns or other suitable destruction facilities, including monitoring, verification, and licensing, may require $50,000 to $100,000 per facility. These indicative costs were not included in the RTF replenishment total. Actual needs will depend on national circumstances, refrigerant bank size, geography, existing infrastructure, and whether national or regional approaches are feasible. With that, I'd like to thank you and turn over to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for the presentation. I know it seemed quite detailed, but I know that it was actually a very brief summary of all the work that you have undertaken and prepared for the parties at this meeting. I'd like to now proceed with a question and answer session. So parties may wish to provide some questions to the team. We will leave discussion on the report till later. So please confine any interventions at this point to questions only. And I may intervene if you stray into discussion, because we will have the discussions later. So I have a few parties starting to take the floor. So far I have Cuba and Bahrain. Cuba, you have the floor.
Sí, muchas gracias, señora copresidenta. Y siendo esta nuestra primera intervención, deseamos agradecer al Reino de Tailandia y a la Secretaría de Protocolo por todo el apoyo brindado para la realización de esta importante reunión. Primeramente, sería útil definir en qué momento de la reunión vamos a analizar el informe, en tanto si tenemos consideraciones con relación al informe. Y bueno, tenemos dos preguntas para el grupo de trabajo. Primero, aclarar por qué en el informe no se considera el aumento de costos para los países de bajo consumo y los problemas analizados en el capítulo 6 del informe. Y segundo, si se podrían considerar estos costos para el informe suplementario. Serían nuestras dos preguntas y tener definido en qué momento de la reunión haríamos el análisis de este punto, de este tema 3 de la agenda, donde tenemos incluso una propuesta de CRP para esta reunión. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Cuba. I'll obviously leave the answers to the questions to the TEEP, the technical questions. In relation to your question about when we're considering the report, well, I think we will have a Q&A session now. Then we will have a plenary discussion on the report. And then the usual practice is that we would convene a contact group to have more further discussions, potentially more detailed questions, but also to consider the supplementary guidance that would be provided to the TEEP by the parties, so in order for them to do their supplementary report by September. In terms of timing, we have not finally concluded when we would start a contact group. We need to, assuming that one is commenced, but we think it would be possibly as early as today, but we'll have to see how the conversation goes. I hope that clarifies your question on the timing. I'm going to take another couple of questions before I turn to the TEEP for their responses. So after Bahrain, on my list I have Iran and Federated States of Micronesia. Bahrain, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدة الرئيس المشاركة. وفي بداية مداخلتي، بحيث أن هذه أول مداخلة لي في هذا الاجتماع، أود أن أشكر حكومة تايلاند على حسن وكرم الضيافة المعتاد وسعادتنا بالوجود في هذه المدينة الجميلة بين فترة وأخرى. كذلك أشكر سكرتارية الأوزون على إعداد لهذا الاجتماع، وأود أن أتقدم لكم لزميلتك بالتهنئة لوجودكم معنا لقيادة هذا الاجتماع، ونحن على ثقة تامة بحسن قيادتكم. أعتذر تعطيني 30 ثانية، لقد أغلق تلفون اللابتوب، وأود فقط 30 ثانية لإعادة تشغيله، وسأكمل الأسئلة. طبعا لدينا العديد من التعليقات، أنا أعتذر للاستكمال، لدينا العديد من التعليقات، ولكن في هذه المرحلة سأكتفي بطرح مجموعة من الأسئلة التي أعددتها. والحقيقة أن هناك الكثير من الأسئلة التي في خلدنا، ولكن أعتقد أن الوقت لا يسع ولا يسمح بطرحها جميعا، فسأكتفي بطرح 4 إلى 5 أسئلة فقط. في البداية أود أن أشكر فريق الRTF على هذا الإعداد المتميز وأكثر من جيد لهذا التقرير، وأعترف بأنه يعد من أفضل التقارير التي مرت علينا كدول المادة الخامسة والأطراف جميعا. السؤال الأول لدي بخصوص المنهجية. ذكر التقرير أنه اعتمد منهجية قائمة على الامتثال compliance based methodology، إلا أن بعض الافتراضات مثل توزيع التمويل خصوصا في سكاجوال بي تؤخر التمويل إلى ما بعد الالتزامات. كيف يتوافق ذلك مع مفهوم التمويل قائم على الامتثال؟ سبب هذا السؤال أن الامتثال يتطلب توفير الموارد قبل موعد الالتزام وليس بعده، خصوصا بالنسبة لدول المجموعة الثانية تحديدا نتكلم، الذي يبدأ تجميدها بعد العام 2028. السؤال الثاني بشأن تمويل المجموعة الثانية. كيف تتوقع فريق الRTF أن تتمكن دول المجموعة الثانية من تنفيذ أنشطة المرحلة الأولى من خطط تعديل كيغالي في عام 2028 في حين أن سكجول بي أو الجدول الباء يؤجل 90% من التمويل للفترة ما بعد 2030 ل 2032؟ لدي سؤال بخصوص فعالية التكلفة التاريخية historical cost effectiveness. لم أفهم حقيقة ما هو الأساس الذي اعتمد عليه فريق العمل في استخدام قيم فعالية التكلفة التاريخية historical cost effectiveness، وهل تم التحقق بالفعل من أنها ما تزال تعكس تكاليف الحالية في ظل تغيير أسعار التقنيات والبدائل؟ فيما يخص خصم الملكية الأجنبية 15%، ما هو الأساس الفني أو الإحصائي الذي استند إليه التقرير لتطبيق خصم موحد بنسبة 15% للملكية الأجنبية على جميع القطاعات التصنيع وجميع الدول؟ أسأل هنا لأن الافتراض قد لا يعكس الواقع في كثير من دول المادة الخامسة وقد يؤدي إلى خفض التمويل المؤهل. أيضا فيما يخص إدارة المشاريع الBMUs، يعترف التقرير بأن التكاليف أو تكاليف وحدات إدارة المشاريع لم تدرج في التقديرات رغم أنها تمثل جزءا أساسيا في تنفيذ المشاريع. فالسؤال لماذا لم يتم احتسابها ضمن الاحتياجات التمويلية؟ سأكتفي بسؤال أخير. في ضوء جميع العناصر التي ناقشها التقرير ولم تدرج ضمن التقديرات المالية مثل BMUs، الرقمنة، الRM واحتياجات كفاءة الطاقة وإلى آخره، هل يرى فريق العمل أن النطاق الحالي يعكس بالفعل التكلفة الكاملة لتحقيق الامتثال؟ شكرا سيدة الرئيس.
Thank you very much, Bahrain. I'm glad you didn't have your computer up because I hesitate to wonder how many more questions you might have had. So given how many you asked, I'm going to turn to the TEEP now to try and respond to the questions so far from Cuba and yourself, and then we'll return to the floor for some more questions. So TEEP, in your own time.
Thank you. And I'm going to respond to the distinguished delegate of Cuba on why we did not include the considerations of Chapter 6 on the special needs of LVCs and the issues and costs that we have included in the report into the computation of the replenishment fund. And what we did is that we were instructed to follow the compliance model in the TOR, and therefore we had to follow the EXCOM decisions based on the cost framework that's applied to LVCs. While we are aware that there's an expected review of these cost guidelines for stage 2 KIP in 2028, we were not asked to estimate or prepare something to address that or do some forecasting if there's an impact, because the impact on that can be that they're going to be increased or not, or maybe they're going to be changing in one sector and not in the other. So it was hard for us without a clear mandate on this. So we haven't done that. But again, we welcome any suggestion or requirement from parties, but we'll do it for the supplementary report if you so wish. Okay, so I think for Cuba, that's it. For Bahrain, distinguished delegate of Bahrain, thank you for your questions. Like I said, I'm not going to probably not respond in the sequence, but trying to address all your issues. All the calculations that we did, it's based on a compliance model. So the total funding estimate per scenario is based on this compliance model. The allocation of how you're going to divide, split this total fund, if you're going to be in 2027, 2029, or 2030 or 32 and on for the 3 triennium, that is the thing that we're saying that you can adjust. And indeed, as you mentioned, allocation B for G2 countries may be too late. But considering that there are some that we don't even have baseline for those countries, that some of them, the G2 countries, have not ratified. So these things can be adjusted in different scenarios in the supplementary report. So we welcome guidance on that. If you want to be something more front-loaded to ensure compliance. But we also took into consideration one point that I think it's important, that we are always looking to sustainable finance in the three triennium, you know. So if you forward funding from this total needed for compliance to the next triennium and then have less in the other two, or vice versa, I understand that's not what parties wish. It's something more stable for the 3 triennium. So you can work with this allocation to adjust to, you know, the needs of parties, and so we can do that if discuss maybe in the contact group on that. On the 15%, we use this 15% deduction for ineligible enterprises. It's like a legacy number that we have used in previous replenishment report. We have done some consultations with the Multilateral Fund Secretariat, and I'm very thankful to them. We're trying to work together to see if we can get something more updated number for this. But there is not enough or not complete data that allow us to have something that's very represented. There's lots of variations, and but the discussions we had with Secretariat is that based on their understanding is that this 15% is a reasonable number for us as an assumption. If we're going to use a flat rate and deduct everybody, depending on the circumstances, the same amount, this is something that you're going to have to guide us on that, but we don't have anything better than that at this moment to apply. For the PMU also, we have not included because it has to do with the differences of approved amounts for PMUs in different countries and regions and size of projects, sort of thing, that was hard for us to introduce in a model. It would be distortions on that, and we didn't have anything that was that could guide us on something more solid and robust that we could do that. But if we are open, because like I said, the model is very flexible, and we can maybe not to do considerations for every single project, but we could apply like a flat number, a percentage for PMU out of the total funding. That so they're going to be, these are things that can be adapted in the supplementary report. And for the cost effectiveness figures, we did consider looking to HCFC cost effectiveness figures as a proxy for HFC conversions, but it was common understanding of the task force that that would not be correct to do, because there are conversion costs, and it's for the limited experience that we have that are higher for HFCs, depending on the technology on this. So applying historical HCFC cost effectiveness figures to HFC phase down, we didn't have enough published information and analysis in XCOM report like we use for the HCFCs in decision in document 8910 Rev 1 to extract figures that would be representative, more representative of the actual cost of these conversions. Most of the KIPs approved when we started doing the RTF report. The 83 parties, there was a large majority of LVCs, so to extract experience for that conversion. I'm sure that as the executive committee continues to fund more and more KIPs, we would have more data in the future to do a better analysis of that. I hope that answers your questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Teep. On my list now, I have Iran, Micronesia, Lesotho, and Lebanon. Just a reminder that this is a question and answer session only, so please, no comments at this stage. We'll come back for comments. I now cede the floor to Iran. You have the floor.
So thank you very much. Since this is the first time Iran is taking the floor, I would like to appreciate the government of Thailand for the excellent hosting of this meeting as always. And also congratulate the team for the excellent preparation and also presentation. Just I have a single question, goes back to the slide number 23. Just they mentioned that this RTF forecasted 100% ratification of the Kigali Amendment in the first triennium. But the number of the countries that they mentioned, it is 19. But as we know that already we have 25 countries, they have not yet ratified the Kigali Amendment. And also today morning, Madam Megomi Seki also mentioned that already we have 25 countries. Why, the simple question, why they mentioned just 19, not 25? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iran. I'll collect a few more questions before I turn to the tape. Micronesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Greetings, colleagues. As it is our first time taking the floor, the delegation of the Federated States of Micronesia wishes to begin by extending our heartfelt thanks to the government of Thailand for hosting this meeting. It is good to be back in the beautiful and great hospitality of the country. My delegation wishes to express its appreciation to the Replenishment Task Force for the comprehensive and thoughtful report. We particularly welcome the attention given in Chapter 6 to the unique circumstances of LVC and VLVCs. We strongly agree with the report's conclusion that LVCs face structural implementation challenges that are fundamentally different from those of larger consuming countries. Compliance with the Kigali Amendment requires every party, regardless of the market size, to establish essentially the same institutional systems: legislation, licensing and quota systems, customs enforcement, technician training, safety standards, reporting, stakeholder engagement, and project management. These are largely fixed costs that do not decrease simply because national consumption is small. For many Pacific Island countries...
Excuse me, Micronesia. Can you ask your questions, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So we would appreciate clarification from the RTF on 3 questions. First, in the RTF's assessment, are the replenishment scenarios presented sufficient to enable LVCs to implement all of the institutional, regulatory, and servicing sector activities necessary to comply with the Kigali Amendment? Sorry. Or do they present only the minimum funding required under the current cost guidelines? Second, has the RTF considered whether the current funding architecture reflects the realities of small island and geographically dispersed countries where regional delivery mechanisms and shared implementation services may be more cost-effective than purely national approaches? Since Cuba has proposed presenting a CRP, we would be interested in engaging in discussion on a CRP to this effect. And finally, for Pacific Island developing countries, strengthening compliance is not simply a question of financing national projects. Many implementation activities, including certification and life cycle refrigerant management, are likely to be economically viable at the national level. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Micronesia. I understood that last section of your intervention to be a statement rather than a question. I now turn to Lesotho. You have the floor for your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam. I'm just on the compliance model. My question is that regarding special case for LPCs, does the compliance model consider vulnerability factor? Because if we are considering that factor, we were expecting that a little bit maybe the tables have to turn out, especially for LPCs. So my question is just that on that factor, whether it's considered. Thank you.
Sorry, Lesotho, could you just restate your question? I think the team missed a key point.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm on compliance model, especially considering special case for LVCs. Does the model consider vulnerability factor? if the accent is okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much for the clarification. We might now take questions from Lebanon, and then we'll turn to the team. Lebanon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As this is the first time my delegation takes the floor, Lebanon would like to express its gratitude to the government of Thailand for its warm hospitality and the excellent arrangements made for the 48th meeting of the open-ended working group. We also extend our sincere appreciation to the Ozone Secretariat for its outstanding preparation and organization of this meeting. Lebanon would like to thank the TIAP members and in particular the Replenishment Task Force for the comprehensive and forward-looking report prepared. We appreciate the considerable efforts invested in addressing both the traditional compliance needs of Article 5 parties and emerging implementation challenges associated with the evolving objectives of the Montreal Protocol. We have one specific question. We believe the importance of digital tools and its integral part of implementation of projects for service sector. And we note with interest that the report recognizes the growing role of digital technologies and tools in supporting implementation within the refrigeration servicing sector and presents indicative implementation approaches and costs. At the same time, these digitalization efforts are presented separately from the compliance funding model. Could the panel kindly elaborate on the rationale for this approach? In particular, does the panel envisage that the digital technologies could become an integral component of the replenishment, assessments, and implementation support under the multilateral fund? As more Article 5 parties adopt digital solutions to strengthen refrigerant management, technician support, monitoring, and reporting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lebanon. So I now turn to the TEEP to answer those questions from those 4 countries. TEEP, you have the floor.
It was the question. Yeah, thank you. Regarding the information about the 25 parties that have not ratified, we have looked into the ratification status as of 8 April 2026, and that's the number we got for A5 parties. But we definitely will check with if there's any discrepancy, we definitely fix it for the supplementary report. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you to the distinguished member from Micronesia regarding the questions on the LVCs. Indeed, the question regarding is the replenishment sufficient for the funding at the current levels? I guess what we have tried to show in the report that these fundings are not sufficient simply because the fixed costs and the training costs are almost the majority of that funding available. So there's not enough funding for other activities, including like demonstration projects or other capacity building activities. So, but we did not consider in the model any different funding modalities rather than what's available today. Regarding the regional cooperation, we also noted that there are discussions at the EXCOM regarding regional centers, regional testing centers, or centers of excellence. And those discussions are still taking place, and we might await the results, maybe include whatever comes out in the supplementary report. Regarding the third question, as you said, was more than a statement, but thank you for listing some of those items that we can definitely add to the report itself. Regarding the question from the distinguished member from Lesotho about vulnerability, we did consider challenges, but we're interested to have a bilateral to understand the implications of this sector on the LVCs, and it's an interesting part of it. Thank you so much.
Regarding the question from the distinguished delegate from Lebanon about the digitalization and why it was not in the compliance model. Basically, in the current compliance model, it is based on kilograms of ODP, tons or or HFC phase down. So there is no current methodology to include the digital technologies, and parties may wish to include phase down as part of their HPMPs or KIP methodologies, and TEEP are in the RTF. We just provided examples on how to include them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teep. On my list now, I have India, United States of America, the Maldives, and China. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We thank the Replenishment Task Force of the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel for preparing this comprehensive report on the funding requirements for the 2027-2029 replenishment of the Multilateral Fund and the presentation. As we transition into the critical phase of the Kigali Amendment, Article 5 parties face unprecedented challenges that differ significantly from a previous experience with ODS phase-out. Achieving these targets require a holistic approach that goes beyond mere compliance and fosters long-term strategies for sustaining the phase-out of hydrochlorofluorocarbons and phase-down of hydrofluorocarbons. While we'll seek broad clarifications on the RTF report during this plenary session, we propose that the detailed technical analysis, specific methodology assumptions, and operational figures be discussed thoroughly within the contact group. This will allow us the appropriate forum to collaborate with the RTF and peer delegations to refine the scenarios effectively. To set the stage for deeper discussions, we request initial clarifications from the RTF on the following 6 key thematic areas. Firstly, on cash flow analysis, the RTF was tasked with considering the cash flows needed for various funding windows. However, the report focuses primarily on allocating total funding across triennia. We request the RTF to elaborate on how these funding scenarios align with real-world disbursement schedules and cash flow needs for critical initiatives like the Energy Efficiency Fund and inventories of unwanted refrigerants. Secondly, on cost effectiveness for HFCs. The report notes a lack of historical cost effectiveness data for HFC projects, leading to reliance on existing guidelines. Given the complexities of transitioning to low global warming potential alternatives, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, how does the RTF's model account for evolving real-world costs and the substantial support required to ensure a sustainable transition beyond a simple cost-effectiveness calculation? Thirdly, on life cycle refrigerant management. Although the report addresses LRM, it stops short of including a specific funding estimate. Since LRM is a cornerstone of a sustainable phase down, we seek clarification on the anticipated funding implications if a comprehensive funding window for LRM is established during the 2027-2029 triennium and how this replenishment can be structured to accommodate it. Fourthly, on energy efficiency integration. Improving energy efficiency is integral to maximizing the climate benefits of the Kigali Amendment. We need further elaboration on how the current estimates ensure that the replenishment fully supports the integration of energy efficiency in a manner that maximizes climate co-benefits and facilitates compliance. Next is on safety and flammability. The transition to low global warming potential refrigerants involves significant safety and flammability risks. We seek clarification on how the funding assessment covers the essential national level costs associated with technician training, certification, public awareness, and the revision of safety standards. Lastly, on long-term strategy versus immediate targets. The current replenishment models focus on 3-year cycles risk missing the broader picture. We request the RTF's perspective on how this replenishment can empower Article 5 countries to build long-term sustainable strategies that permanently reduce HFC dependence rather than just funding activities to meet immediate compliance target. Madam Co-Chair, addressing these fundamental issues is critical for the robust and equitable implementation of the Montreal Protocol. India looks forward to actively participating in further discussions to finalize a comprehensive supplementary report for MOP 38. And my sincere apologies if I have repeated any queries which have already been answered. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, India. I turn now to the United States. You have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Restricting our comments to just the questions. So we understand RTF seems to be saying there was not enough data to apply historical cost effectiveness figures to the HFC phase down estimate. But there's quite a bit of historic information to draw from on projects converting to alternatives under HPMPs and early HFC investment projects. So we'd like it if RTF could elaborate on why it did not attempt to provide a scenario with lower cost effectiveness levels that reflect these historical cost effectiveness levels. A second question is, reading the report, our understanding on the HFC funding estimates is that RTF considered the 65% HCFC component of the baseline as consumption under the servicing sector. Our question is, did the RTF assume the full HCFC component will convert to HFCs? And then why wouldn't RTF work off actual consumption numbers as a costing scenario? And I think you may already be hearing it, but we have a number of questions as to why additional scenarios were not run in addition to those we see in the report. Our next question is whether the RTF confirmed the HCFC cost estimates were accurate with the Multilateral Fund Secretariat. Much of this funding is already predetermined. There's actually not a whole lot left to uncertainty there. So we'd like to know specifically what the RTF did in that regard and confirming those numbers with the Secretariat. Our next question is for the largest consuming country. Why didn't the RTF use a scenario using a cost estimate based on recent history of funding, using the level of funding over the past 5 years, which is a very consistent funding level? We see the RTF putting together what I would look at as high cost scenarios. And so our question is why, and this issue has come up repeatedly, why did they not include a scenario that looks at what actual recent funding is actually being approved at? And then a very specific question as to why the RTF is estimating additional HFC 23 byproduct mitigation costs in 2 countries that do not have approved projects under the multilateral fund, when that control obligation actually came into effect, I believe, 7 years ago. We do understand quite well the cost estimate that the RTF made for Mexico and for Argentina, which do have approved projects. And then finally, we have kind of a broader question that relates to a reflection we have just looking not only at this replenishment report, but looking at the last one. And I think the general, I'll elaborate on this a little bit, but the general question really is whether the RTF has really evaluated the methodology it has used in this and the last replenishment estimate as it relates to how that methodology is projecting actual spending in the multilateral fund, and whether the RTF is looking at making any course corrections with that methodology. And so the point would be, when we look at the last replenishment, the RTF's estimate was a range of 975 million to $1.14 billion. Now, we've just come out of the last replenishment meeting. We've approved $417 million in projects. But I'd note there's a lot of spending in this replenishment period that relates to non-compliance activities, particularly energy efficiency, where we spent $80 to $90 million, when the RTF estimated $31 million in the last replenishment. And so it appears to us that the RTF methodology is a systematic, very large overestimate of the actual costs of compliance. And so our question is, has the RTF gone back and taken a really close look, cost category by cost category, to really understand why those estimates in the last replenishment were so wildly inaccurate as compared to the money that was actually spent? Because it appears to us the RTF is carrying through this same methodology into this replenishment period, which is going to produce exactly the same overestimate of actual need in this replenishment report. And I'll just say it's a huge difference. If you look at what the RTF estimated for HPMPs, we've only spent about 48% of that amount. Now, we do have one more XCOM meeting before the end of this replenishment. For HFCs, we've spent maybe about a third of the amount that is estimated. We have spent more money than projected in energy efficiency, as I said, but I guess the question is, what is the RTF doing, to build on lessons learned from the last replenishment, where we've seen that the methodology has not provided us an accurate estimate of need. And the ultimate goal of the RTF report is to give us an accurate assessment of how much money we need. It's not an academic exercise. It's a pragmatic one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. Since both India and the USA asked multiple questions, I think I might turn to the TEEP now to respond to those questions. TEEP, you have the floor.
So I'll start by answering some of the questions for the distinguished member from delegate from India. First, about the LRM and why it was not included. Basically, it was not part of the decision. However, based on how we read the deliberation at the EXCOM, we felt it is an important element that needs to be accounted for, and that's why we included it in Chapter 8 and in the annex. And we are at the party's hand and can include it in the next version of the report. The next question is energy efficiency, and yes, we believe energy efficiency is an important part and an important co-benefit to the Kigali Amendment, as have been introduced by many reports. The energy efficiency is well spelled in Chapter 7. We see the 4 decisions that suggest how we operationalize energy efficiency as part of the multilateral fund. And the energy efficiency improvement basically is back to the parties. We can account for it as the parties wish. Regarding the safety and flammability, the training is part of the HPMP and KIP activities, and as parties select their alternative refrigerants based on the alternative refrigerant of choice, parties select what training activities are best suited for their respective trainees, and can alter their HPMP and KIP activities. And HPMP and KIP activities are well accounted for in our RTF based on the compliance model. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. We're trying to separate by subject before we respond. I'm going to try to answer some of the questions regarding the methodology. There's some points that it's important to mention before we actually give an answer, because we follow we have to follow strictly the terms of reference, and it's our understanding that, for instance, when we hear follow the compliance targets and the compliance model, in our understanding, we have, for instance, to calculate target reductions based on the baseline and not actual consumption, unless there's it's written in the TOR that we should do that. So we appreciate more guidance than in this regard for the supplementary report. It's that if there's a party wants us to do that, we can do that. But if it's not in there, we'll follow what the Montreal Protocol does, including using the 65% HCFC consumption component of the base, that's part of the baseline. So if you want us to do other scenarios that are different than this, we need that in our terms of reference, and we'll definitely, it will be clearer for us. About the cost effectiveness, we have done a lot of search in documents that are published because TEEP doesn't have the, in our mandate, we're supposed to analyze and assess available published documents. We don't have either the sources of the condition to do research or searching into large numbers of databases and things because that's in a limited amount of month that we have to do the report. So we definitely consulted with the Secretary. We actually worked together a lot, and they were very helpful to us in actually searching for existing documents that the Secretariat did this analysis. If we don't have that document, it's pretty hard for us to do for 144 parties to try to find details in every single project document. So we would have to, that would not be possible for us to do. So for HCFCs, we had that document. So we looked into that and we did an analysis and tried to in our methodology to find the value that would be more robust to represent what we could apply to all the parties. So if we are to break down the methodology in just having a separate methodology for the largest consuming party from the other parties, we also want to be guided on that. We couldn't do that, but that was not the guidance. We applied similar methodology to all parties. But if you want us to do like the last 5 years for one party, we can do that, but we need that guidance in our terms of reference. So regarding the comparison of methodology, we try to improve the methodology because the model that was used for the past replenishments was more like a top-down model where we used to calculate the total amount of funding needed for the complete phase down or complete phase out. And then we would come back from that final stop and then apportion funding per year for the different years. This time we try to look into more of a snapshot of a project cycle and how the executive committee functions, because I think it's easier for parties to understand. And I think that is more transparent as well. And I guess we were asked to do that in the terms of reference to bring that information clearer to parties. And we definitely worked very hard on trying to do that. So again, we are in your hands. We welcome suggestions for the work for the supplementary report and clear guidance on what is expected from this task force. Thank you. I'm going to give the floor to some of the colleagues for the other questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions from India. I'll attempt to answer some of the remaining ones that were raised. There was a question asking for an elaboration of sort of cash flow analysis and how our funding scenarios would align with that. So the RTF allocated the HFC phase down funding, as you heard, across the 3 triennia, following the schedules suggested, A and B, to reflect, an understanding of how MLF project cycle and cash flow requirements might sort of operate. As the implementation modalities and timing for energy efficiency, revolving funds, and continued LRM discussions have not been determined by the executive committee, these initiatives were excluded from the core funding estimates. The RTF instead presented indicative funding in those sections that considered these these sort of newer concepts, but certainly the RTF welcomes guidance from parties on how to reflect this in terms of our supplementary report. There was a similar question on, I think it was also raised by the US, and I think Suwali sort of answered on the cost effectiveness for HFCs. The RTF considered using historical HFC values for HCFC as a proxy for the HFC phase-on activities. But again, as she mentioned, lacking historical information, we would sort of need the guidance to be able to do that and sort of welcome a different approach than what we've provided there, as long as information and data would be available for us to use or refer to. I think the LRM and safety and flammability questions from India were already discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teep. I have 3 more countries on my list. I'd like to close the list for questions. So if any other delegations would like to provide some questions to the Teep, can you please let me know or press your button as soon as possible so we can close the list. I'm going to close the list when the Maldives has finished their questions. So Maldives, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As this is the first time that Maldives is taking the floor, we would like to thank Ozone Secretariat for the excellent arrangements for the meeting and thank Kingdom of Thailand for the continuous warm hospitality. We would also like to thank TIP for their continuous hard work and the comprehensive report. As for our questions, we would like to clarify on that the given stage 1 cost effectiveness values were used to estimate stage 2 funding. Could this approach underestimate stage 2 needs for LVCs once HPMP and KIP implementation no longer overlap, and could an alternative LVC scenario be included in the supplementary report? And also, noting that Chapter 6 recognized technician training is an important challenge for LVCs. However, the transition to lower GWP alternatives increasingly requires not only training, but also certification, licensing, safety standards, access to appropriate tools and equipment, and sustained integration with national vocational training system. To what extent are these broader services sector transformation costs reflected in the current replenishment estimates? Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Maldives. So I'm going to close the list. I'm going to give you a count to 3. I have China, Japan, and Ireland for the EU on my list. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so the list is closed. I now turn to China. You have the floor.
谢谢主席。鉴于这是中方的第一次发言，首先中方感谢泰国政府热情周到的安排以及秘书处的精心筹备，也祝贺2位主席对主会议的有效主持，愿和各方共同在本周共同工作，为年底的 MOP 做好技术准备。感谢 RTF 对于增资报告所做的努力和全面的介绍。本次报告需要全面反映所有 A5 国家 HCFC 淘汰和 HFC 削减的履约需求。祝贺 RTF 在有限的信息下出色完成了本次报告，希望通过深入交流进一步准确理解报告。刚才 RTF 也多次强调，将会进一步考虑第98次执委会的决定。我们了解到，第98次执委会的决定批准了超过1亿美元的项目资金，设立了 925万美元资金窗口以及180万美元站点运维保障资金，并就基加利修正案实施战略方法达成决定，还就 HFC 起始点消费量的扣除方法等议题进行了讨论。那么这些项目审批和政策进展将对2027到2029增资期相关费用要素的测算产生影响。那么我们希望了解，就上述决定对于目前测算结果的影响 ，RTF 有没有一个初步的评估，以及在未来的补充报告中可能如何考虑上述决定的内容。第二，也如其他同事所关心的，我们也希望进一步了解 RTF 的费用测算方法学。我们注意到报告在 HCFC 消费行业资金估算中，基于历史费用有效性值和费用导则 CE 值两种情景提供了资金范围。那么我们也希望进一步了解 RTF 就 CE 值选取的依据历史 CE 数据的来源和适用条件、制造业外资扣除比例的确定方法以及 PMU 成本的影响等，提供进一步的说明。关于国家的分组，我们注意到报告在很多章节中采用了最大的消费国、一个缔约方和其他14个缔约方等单独区分一个缔约方的表述方法。这一做法与2024到2026期增资报告的分组表述方式明显不同。此前报告基于 LVC 和非 LVC 分类以及国家消费量水平进行分组处理，所有缔约方均在各自分组中得到同样的体现。我们希望 RTF 就分组方法学的调整依据提供澄清说明，确保费用测算方法的透明度、一致性和公平性，使所有 A5 国家的履约需求得到客观充分的体现。我知道这一个环节主要是提问，但刚才我希望也利用这个机会来表述一下我们对于刚才的一些问题的一些回应。关于美方代表提出的使用最近历史数据的问题
This time is only for questions to the tape. If you have other questions, you may raise them in the discussion section.
我们是对这个问题的一个进一步的希望 RTF 来考虑的问题。
You'll be able to do that in the discussion section and in the contact group discussions later. So thank you very much. This is just for questions to the tape. Thank you, China.
好，谢谢。
Thank you, China. I appreciate your understanding. I turn now to Japan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As this delegation is taking the floor for the first time, we would also like to express our sincere appreciation to the ASEAN Secretariat for preparation of this meeting, as well as to the Kingdom of Thailand for its warm hospitality in hosting this meeting in this beautiful city of Bangkok. We also wish to thank TEEP and RTF for the considerable work that has gone into the preparing this interim report. We have just one question. In connection with the question regarding the status of a Kigali Amendment ratification, we would like to ask for information purposes, if available, about the assumption that all remaining 19 non-ratifying Article 5 parties will complete ratification by 2029 and submit funding requests within that triennium. We would appreciate if any additional information, if available, that RTF or maybe the Secretariat may be able to share on the ratification outlook for those parties. For example, whether ratification is actively already under consideration in those countries, or whether there are any known obstacles that they may have been informed of that might affect the feasibility of this assumption. If such information is available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. We'll direct the question to the RTF, and then perhaps you can have some bilateral discussions with the Secretariat if you need to. Finally, I have Ireland on behalf of the EU. You have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We have a number of points to raise on the TEEP report, but we'll keep those for the discussion section as per your instruction. With regard to specific questions, we have just one for now, and that is to do with, in the previous RTF report, so the one that estimated funding for the 2024 to 2026 triennium, the estimate made for the 27 to 29 triennium ranged between $933 and $992 million. That's significantly lower than the estimate in the current RTF report, so we'd just like to understand a little why there's such a discrepancy between the two estimates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ireland. We've come to the end of our list now. I'll turn to the TEEP. I realise you might need a few minutes, but we are about 8 minutes out from 1 p.m. and we'd like to perhaps try and finish answers to the questions by lunch. So thank you very much, TEEP.
I'll go ahead and try to respond to the questions from the distinguished delegate from China. Thank you for your questions. You asked if the RTF had considered even preliminarily, the impacts of the Executive Committee 98th meeting decisions. We've sort of considered them. We participated in those discussions, but we have not, considered or put it into our analysis to see what the potential impacts might be, but it's something we're anxious to do. With regard to the HCFC scenarios and the use of historical cost-effectiveness thresholds for the manufacturing sectors in one scenario and the use of cost-effectiveness thresholds through the HCFC cost guidelines in another scenario, we note that it might be sufficiently different in the overall total funding, but we do elaborate on it more in Annex 2 of our report, and happy to answer further questions. And then the seemingly different treatment in our consideration of one party or 14 parties for estimated funding. Actually, we see our approach as very similar to what we did in the previous replenishment task force, where it was more helpful for us to group parties in terms of their sort of consumption information, to be able to consider similar sector distributions and apply the cost effectiveness factors to those sort of sectors based on the consumption levels of grouped countries. And it's a very similar approach to what we've used in this case.
Japan. Okay.
Just a quick response to the distinguished delegate from Japan. So our assumption that the 19, and we will, need to check that number, remaining parties to ratify the Kigali Amendment, or perhaps optimistic that we thought the 19 parties coming in by 2029 would make them eligible for funding and would be contributing to meeting the goals of the protocol and the Kigali Amendment. So certainly we can revisit that number if there's a different approach or scenario that the task force should be assuming. Thank you.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate from the Maldives for the questions regarding the cost effectiveness for the LVCs. The LVCs are definitely funded in brackets. We use the same methodology to reflect for the stage 2. For instance, whatever was given for the 10% in stage 1, we considered the same approach for stage 2. We did not consider any additional ones, any additional funding in that respect. And regarding the training, we did not consider certification, licensing, the tools as part of the training costs. These were just basically pure training costs as far as we could extract from the KIPs that were submitted. Some of the funding in some of the KIPs was mixed. For instance, the activity included more than just training, so we tried to extract the training part because we wanted to reflect exactly what is needed for that part. So with the help of the Secretariat, we can maybe improve on that in the supplementary report by breaking it down further and adding the activities. So thank you for bringing this to our attention.
And thank you for the EU for the question on the comparison and why the discrepancy from the previous estimated funding from now. The methodology used in the past, as I explained, was different. And then what we had with that methodology was more, because also we considered business plan information and all this, we had only indicative figures for later triennia that were not, in this time what we have a compliance period where we have a total fund for the 3 triennia, and then the amount of the 2027 to 2029 will depend on how you want to allocate that fund based on whatever proposal you want to make or adjust from what we proposed. Like the resource allocation A and B can be something different. If you want front load more, then what we propose and or less, that would be different. But the total would be a lot more accurate, I would say, than indicative cost, especially at a time when we didn't have baselines for HFCs. In the previous replenishment report, there was a lot of data missing, and you know, that would definitely impact on the total cost. I'll be happy to discuss more that if you want to show the methodology better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teep. I think that concludes our question and answer session. So on behalf of the parties, a huge thank you. There were many complicated questions there, and we appreciate your time and patience in responding to those. We obviously haven't finished our discussion on this agenda item. We still have the discussion section to go. Given the time, we will resume this agenda item after lunch. In the meantime, I turn to the Secretariat to see if there are any announcements. Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Distinguished delegates, the Secretariat would like to make the following announcements. The UN Code of Conduct on preventing harassment, including sexual harassment at UN events, is applicable to all delegates at this meeting. For any concerns or to report any incident, please contact the Code of Conduct Focal Point, Mr. Pablo Moscoso de la Cuba, or you can email him the email address displayed in this slide. The Secretariat remains committed to improving the sustainability of these meetings through the environmental management system that was adopted in 2022. Please support this initiative by bringing your own water bottles and reused lanyards from previous meetings. In addition, information on this is included in the meeting portal. Lastly, please take a moment to review the information on the slide displayed on the screen for more details and the QR code to the IISD meeting coverage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. So we will resume our work at 3 p.m. This afternoon. I wish you a good break, bon appetit, and see you at 3 p.m. promptly. Thank you, delegates.